The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause or another person, the more human he is. Viktor Frankl. You try to do the right thing. You're honest. You help others. You stay kind, even when it costs you. But after a while, something inside you starts asking, why? Why keep doing good if no one sees, if no one changes, if the world just keeps rewarding selfishness, power and noise? It's not that you want applause. You just want to know it's not all in vain. Viktor Frankl would say your goodness matters not because of what it produces, but because of who you become through it. Meaning, he believed, is born not in success, but in the decision to love, serve, and endure even when it hurts. Marcus Aurelius would answer differently. He believed that virtue is not about reward, as it's about alignment. You don't do good for recognition. You do good because it is who you are. Two philosophies, one fueled by purpose, the other by principle. But both agree on this. Doing good is not a performance, it's a way of being. And even when no one claps, it still counts. You help. You sacrifice. You do the right thing, and not once, but consistently. And at first it feels noble. It feels like you're making a difference. But slowly, reality starts to set in. The people you helped forget. The ones you protected turn away. The world doesn't change. And you're left with a bitter question echoing inside. What's the point? You did good, and nothing got better. Sometimes it even got worse. You were kind, and they took advantage. You were just, and others cheated. You gave and no one noticed. This is where quiet resentment begins to grow. Not the loud kind, but the internal erosion of idealism. You stop trusting that good matters. You stop expecting return. And eventually, you start to wonder if maybe the world really does belong to the cold, the ruthless, the ones who only look out for themselves. That's the moment when goodness begins to die, not because of evil, but because of disappointment. And once the will to do good fades, you're left with silence, duty, or abandonment. Viktor Frankl would enter this silence with compassion. He knew that when meaning depends on results, we're always at risk of despair. His answer wasn't to deny the pain of being ignored, it was to shift the question. Stop asking, did it work? And start asking, was it meaningful? To Frankl, goodness isn't transactional, it's relational. Your act of love or kindness may not be received, but it still affirms something sacred in you. You are not wasting yourself, you are revealing yourself. Marcus Aurelius would agree, but in different terms. He'd remove emotion from the two equation. Don't waste time thinking about who deserves your kindness, he'd write. Act according to your nature. To Marcus, the reward for goodness isn't in the outcome. It's in the integrity of the act. You do good because that is who you've trained yourself to be. And if the world doesn't care, that's not your concern. Your concern is your own soul, your own alignment with reason, justice, and truth. This isn't cold detachment, it's power. Both Frankl and Marcus saw how fragile goodness becomes when it depends on reaction. One taught that meaning makes goodness sustainable, the other that duty makes it unshakable. Frankl says act out of love. Marcus says act out of principle. But both are saying this. If your goodness is real, it must survive without applause. So, if you're tired of doing good when no one seems to care, maybe that's the test. Not of their gratitude, but of your depth. Because the point of doing good isn't to be seen, it's to stay you. There's a unique kind of fatigue that comes from being good in secret. You stay honest when others lie. You hold the line when others cut corners. You forgive when they would retaliate and no one notices. Worse, sometimes you're mocked for it. Called naive, weak, idealistic. And deep inside, the doubt starts to grow. Is this really worth it? Why keep doing what's right when doing wrong seems faster, louder, and more rewarding? Viktor Frankl understood this tension between conscience and consequence. He saw people cling to decency even when no one watched, and others abandon it the moment the spotlight was gone. For Frankl, the true meaning of goodness lies not in what it produces, but in what it preserves. Your humanity, your dignity, The salvation of man is through love and in love, he wrote. Even when the world doesn't respond, your act of goodness answers life's question. Who are you becoming? Marcus Aurelius would answer more bluntly, it doesn't matter what others think of your goodness. Your task is to be a good person, not to be recognized as one. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be, he wrote. Be one. To Marcus, the only scoreboard that counts is internal. And if the world misunderstands, overlooks, or tramples your virtue, that's a reflection of them, not you. This is where the philosophies split, and yet converge. Frankl's path is fueled by love and meaning. Marcus's path is forged by duty and clarity. One keeps your heart alive, the other keeps your spine straight. And both are needed, especially when goodness feels unrewarded. Because doing good isn't about applause, it's about not becoming bitter, about not letting the world change who you are at your core. Still, it hurts. To care deeply and not be met with care. To give quietly and feel unseen. That pain is real. Frankl would tell you to feel it, but not to let it define your purpose. Let the hurt remind you of how much love is missing in the world, and let that become your task. Marcus would tell you to accept it and keep walking anyway. Not for applause, for alignment. So when you're tempted to stop being good because no one seems to care, remember, the act still matters. And more importantly, it still shapes you. You may never know the impact of your goodness. The gesture that saved someone from collapse, the choice that prevented harm, the quiet presence that gave someone a reason to keep going. We often underestimate the weight of what we do simply because it doesn't echo back. But the most meaningful acts are often invisible. And both Frankl and Marcus understood this. You don't always get to see the fruit of your character, but that doesn't mean it's fruitless. Frankl witnessed this in the camps, where one person's quiet compassion, a word, a crust of bread, a shared look, could rekindle another's will to live. These weren't grand gestures, they weren't rewarded, but they mattered deeply. Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved, he wrote. It finds its deepest meaning in his spiritual being, his inner self, doing. Good to Frankl is not a strategy. It's an extension of who you are, and an offering to something greater than yourself. Marcus Aurelius never expected impact to be visible. He taught that the moment you start needing your actions to be praised, you've compromised them. If you seek tranquility, he said, do less. Do what's essential. And doing what's essential for a Stoic means acting rightly, with or without recognition. For Marcus, even a king's virtue should exist in silence, not because the world isn't watching, but because the wise man no longer needs the world to watch. This changes everything. It means that doing good isn't just for others. It's for the formation of your own soul. Frankl would say every act of kindness is part of your answer to life's question, who will you be in this pain? Marcus would say every disciplined action is a reflection of your moral clarity. Who will you be regardless of outcome? And both point toward the same truth. What you do matters most when no one sees it. We live in a time obsessed with visibility, with broadcasting virtue. But goodness loses its purity when it's performed for attention. The more private your goodness becomes, the more powerful it is. Because then it's not about reputation, it's about substance. So if no one thanks you, if no one notices, if the world never claps, good, that's your test. Because the moment you keep doing good anyway, that's when it becomes real. Doing good without reward isn't just frustrating, it's dangerous. Because over time it starts to wear down your sense of fairness. You think, if no one else is playing fair, why should I? And in that moment, the greatest risk appears. Not that your good actions stop, but that your identity starts to bend. You slowly trade your values for comfort, your clarity for convenience, and little by little you lose yourself. Frankl saw this erosion up close, people who gave in to bitterness because no one acknowledged their suffering or their sacrifice. But he also saw something else, those who continued to act with dignity, even when life gave them nothing in return. He believed that the ultimate freedom is not pleasure or safety, but the ability to choose your response, even here, even now. Man can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom, of independence of mind, he wrote. That is the essence of meaning, staying true when no one is looking. Marcus Aurelius took it even further. He believed that staying virtuous when it's hard is not optional, it's the whole point. The Stoic ideal isn't comfort, it's character. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. That's not morality for the crowd. That's the code of a sovereign soul. When everyone else is swayed by gain, applause or resentment, you remain anchored. Still, because your reward is not outside of you. It's in the person you refuse to stop being. That's the difference between goodness for recognition and goodness as identity. One depends on the world's mood. The other builds a foundation that nothing can shake. Frankl would say, live in such a way that your suffering becomes service. Marcus would say, act so that even in chaos your principles remain intact. One transforms pain into purpose, the other transforms hardship into honor, and yet both require loss. The loss of being seen, of being praised, of being understood. But in that loss, something deeper is born. Inner authority. The knowledge that you don't need applause to stand tall, that your life can be small, quiet, and still sacred because it was lived with intention. So when you feel alone in your goodness, misunderstood in your effort, or invisible in your discipline, breathe. And remind yourself, you're not here to be admired, you're here to be real. In a world obsessed with attention, doing good quietly feels like a waste. But that's where meaning is tested. That's where character is refined. You can do the right thing for years and no one may ever thank you. But that doesn't mean it was pointless. It means you were never doing it for them. You were doing it because of who you are. And that is the kind of goodness that endures, not just in the world, but in the soul. Viktor Frankl believed that when you serve something greater than yourself, you become unshakable. Your acts of love, mercy, or justice don't need witnesses to be real. For the meaning of life, he said, differs from man to man, from day to day, and only he can answer to life by answering for his own life. When you do good, even in silence you answer. You affirm that your existence stands for something, and that answer echoes whether or not anyone claps. Marcus Aurelius didn't need applause to act with integrity. He wrote for no one but himself, not to be praised but to stay disciplined. That's stoicism, to live rightly regardless of reaction. You control your thoughts, you control your actions. The rest is not yours to manage. And when that becomes your code, your actions start to speak louder than any recognition ever could. Together, Frankl and Marcus don't promise ease, they promise meaning and alignment. One tells you that suffering can be redeemed by giving it purpose. The other tells you that action becomes pure when done without expectation. And both insist, goodness that survives in silence is the most powerful goodness of all, because the truth is, people may never notice the good you do. They may forget your name. But what you build in yourself when you act with courage, integrity, and love, that stays. That's the part of you no disappointment can touch. That's the version of you that walks through life with peace, even when unacknowledged. So don't stop being good just because it hurts. Don't give up just because no one's watching. Keep showing up, keep acting rightly. Keep being who you know you are, even when the world goes quiet, because when the crowd is gone and the noise fades, it's not the recognition that remains. It's the man who refused to betray himself. You don't do good because it gets noticed. You do good because it's who you are. Viktor Frankl reminds us that your goodness becomes sacred when it's tied to meaning, not applause. Marcus Aurelius teaches that virtue is complete when it needs no witness. One offers you purpose, the other inner stability. Together, they free you from needing the world to validate your heart. So if no one claps for your kindness, if no one thanks you for staying true, stay true anyway, because your goodness isn't wasted. It's yours. If this message helped reawaken your strength, subscribe to Purpose Through Pain. We create reflections that anchor you through suffering and rebuild your soul with ancient wisdom. Comment below, do you live more by Frankl's meaning or Marcus's principle? Share this with someone who's tired of being good in a world that doesn't seem to care.